My name is Nicole, and I'm 34 years old. After 3 years of silence, I finally regained my hearing through experimental surgery. I still remember the overwhelming joy of that first moment sound returned to my world. But that joy quickly turned to heartbreak. The first voice I heard was my husband Tom whispering "baby" to someone else at 2 a.m. I didn't confront him immediately. Instead, I listened, planned, and waited for the perfect moment. Before I continue this story, let me know where you're watching from. In the comments, hit that like and subscribe button and get ready for the moment no one saw coming. Music was my entire world before everything changed. I taught piano and voice at a community arts center in Seattle, spending my days surrounded by beautiful melodies and eager students. Every note felt like a tiny miracle to me, something I never imagined losing. I met Tom at a local coffee shop where he performed on weekends. He had this magnetic voice that made every woman in the room lean forward, but somehow his eyes always found mine. After his set, he approached my table with a confident smile. "You're the only person who wasn't looking at me, but somehow you were listening the hardest," he said. He was right. I closed my eyes when he sang because his voice transported me. We talked until the shop closed, and I discovered he was both a talented musician and a sound engineer with his own small recording studio. Our romance was a whirlwind. Tom brought spontaneity into my structured life, surprising me with midnight picnics and impromptu road trips. Within a year, he proposed during one of his performances, calling me onto the stage and singing a song he'd written just for me. How could I say anything but yes? My sister Amber warned me we were moving too fast. "You barely know him, Nicole," she said at our engagement dinner. But I was certain. Tom and I seemed to vibrate at the same frequency, finishing each other's sentences and sharing the same dreams. We married in a beautiful garden ceremony, where Tom sang his vows instead of speaking them. I still remember how his voice carried across the lawn, clear and true. My best friend Julia cried harder than I did, whispering afterward that she'd never seen a couple more perfect for each other. We bought a cozy 2-story house in a quiet suburb with a room we designated as our future child's nursery. But children would come later, we decided. I wanted to establish my career first, and Tom was gaining recognition in the local music scene. His band was booking bigger venues, and a record label had shown interest in his original songs. "We have all the time in the world," he'd assured me when I expressed concerns about waiting too long. "Let's enjoy being us first." Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. I taught during the day while Tom worked on his music or at his studio. Evenings were ours, cooking together, watching movies, or simply talking for hours. We were building the foundation for our future, brick by brick. Then came the storm. I was driving home from work on a Friday evening when the skies opened up. The rain was so heavy I could barely see the road. I remember thinking I should pull over and wait it out. That's my last clear memory before waking up in the hospital. The doctors explained I'd been hit by a truck that hydroplaned into my lane. My car had flipped 3 times before landing in a ditch. I'd suffered a serious head trauma, broken ribs, and a shattered left arm. But the most devastating injury wasn't visible. "The impact damaged your auditory nerve," the neurologist explained, his lips moving in what felt like slow motion as I struggled to understand. "You've experienced profound hearing loss in both ears." I watched Tom's face crumple as the doctor continued explaining his words, now carefully directed at both of us. There was a possibility my hearing might return naturally as the swelling decreased, but they couldn't make promises. The damage could be permanent. That night, alone in my hospital room, Tom held my hand and whispered words I couldn't hear. I watched tears stream down his face as he pressed his forehead against mine. In that moment, I believed our love would survive anything, even this silence that had suddenly descended between us. I had no idea then how wrong I would be. The world became a muffled, distant place overnight. I'd taken sound for granted my entire life. The rustling of leaves, birds singing, water running, even the irritating car alarms and neighbors' barking dog I used to complain about. Now I would have given anything to hear those annoyances again. The silence was suffocating at first. I'd wake up disoriented, momentarily forgetting my condition until the crushing reality hit me again. As a musician, losing my hearing felt like losing my soul. How could I teach piano when I couldn't hear the notes? How could I correct a student's pitch or timing? My entire identity had been built around sound, and now it was gone. Tom tried to be supportive in those early days. He enrolled us both in sign language classes and bought whiteboards for every room in the house. He wrote me love notes and left them around for me to find. For doctor's appointments, he took meticulous notes so I wouldn't miss any information. He learned to face me when speaking so I could read his lips, though I was frustratingly slow at it. "We'll get through this together," he'd mouth, clearly squeezing my hand. And for a while, I believed him. But as weeks turned into months, I noticed subtle shifts. Tom's patience began wearing thin when I asked him to repeat himself. The love notes became less frequent, then stopped altogether. Our conversations, once flowing and natural, became basic and functional. Simple things like ordering at a restaurant became complicated procedures, with Tom often sighing before intervening on my behalf. Meanwhile, his music career was taking off. His band started booking bigger venues and even opened for a nationally known act when they came through Seattle. I attended his shows, feeling the vibrations of the music through the floor, watching the crowd respond to sounds I couldn't hear. Tom would look for me in the audience, smiling when our eyes met. But I felt like a spectator in his life rather than a participant. By the end of the first year, we'd developed a new normal, but it wasn't the partnership we once had. I'd learned enough sign language to communicate basics, and my lip reading had improved. I'd also found ways to continue teaching, focusing on technique and theory rather than sound partnering with an assistant teacher who could hear the music. My students were amazingly adaptable, many of them learning basic signs to communicate with me better than my own husband did. As we approached the second anniversary of my accident, the changes in Tom became more pronounced. His band practices stretched later into the night. Studio sessions mysteriously ran overtime. He began keeping his phone face down and would take calls in another room. Not that I could hear his conversations, but it prevented me from seeing his facial expressions. One night, I noticed a smudge of makeup on his collar, foundation that didn't match my shade. When I confronted him through written notes, he laughed it off, explaining that one of the female vocalists he worked with had been crying about a breakup, and he'd hugged her. His explanation seemed reasonable, but doubt had taken root. My sister Amber became my lifeline during this time. Unlike Tom, she had become fluent in sign language, practicing relentlessly until she could converse with me almost as easily as before. She'd come over when Tom was at practice, bringing dinner and much-needed companionship. "Something's off with him," she signed one evening after Tom had canceled our dinner plans for the third time that month. "You deserve better than this, Nicole." I defended him automatically. "It's hard for him, too. Not everyone can adjust to this life." Amber's expression was skeptical, but she didn't push. Instead, she helped me research experimental treatments for hearing loss. That's how we discovered a clinical trial for a new type of neural implant designed to bypass damaged auditory nerves. When I showed Tom the information, his enthusiasm surprised me. He immediately contacted the research team and used his networking skills to help get me accepted into the program. For the first time in months, I saw the old Tom, attentive, supportive, determined to help me. "This could change everything for us," he wrote on our kitchen whiteboard, his face alight with hope. "I want you to hear music again." His renewed attention felt like sunshine after a long winter. I wanted so badly to believe that he was still the man I married, that our problems stemmed solely from my condition and the strain it put on our communication. The doctors were cautiously optimistic about my candidacy for the procedure. They explained the risks clearly. There was a chance it wouldn't work at all, or that it might only partially restore my hearing. There was even a small risk of further damage. But if it works, the specialist mouthed slowly so I could read his lips, you could regain significant auditory function. I signed the consent forms without hesitation. The possibility of hearing again, of hearing Tom's voice, of reclaiming my life as a musician, outweighed any risk. The night before my surgery, Tom held me close in bed. I could feel him speaking against my hair, his chest vibrating with words I couldn't hear. I imagined he was saying all the things we'd lost the ability to share easily. I fell asleep believing we were on the verge of a new beginning. I had no idea that the return of my hearing would reveal truths I wasn't prepared to face. The surgery lasted 8 hours. I remember counting backward from 10 as the anesthesia took hold, making it only to 7 before darkness claimed me. When I woke, my head was wrapped in bandages, and Tom was sitting beside my bed, holding my hand. The specialists had warned us repeatedly not to expect immediate results. The implant needed time to integrate with my neural pathways, and my brain needed to relearn how to process auditory information. They estimated it could take weeks or even months before I noticed any significant improvement, and there was no guarantee I'd regain full hearing. The most important thing is to maintain a quiet, low-stress environment, the doctor wrote on a tablet for me to read. No loud noises, no music yet. Your brain needs to adjust gradually. Tom nodded seriously as he read along, then looked at me with determined eyes. I'll make sure of it, he mouthed carefully. For the 5 days I remained in the hospital, Tom was the perfect husband, attentive patient and loving. He took time off work to stay with me, only leaving to shower and change clothes. He brought photos of our life together, reminding me of happier times and the future we might reclaim if the surgery was successful. When it was time to go home, Tom had prepared everything. He'd rearranged our bedroom to make it easier for me to get around while recovering. He'd stocked the fridge with my favorite foods and set up a comfortable recovery space in our living room with pillows, blankets, and a stack of my favorite books. Welcome home, he wrote on the whiteboard, adding a little heart after the words. The first few days passed in a haze of pain medication and sleep. Tom worked from home, checking on me frequently and making sure I took my medications on schedule. Each night, he'd kiss my forehead and write, "Any change," on the whiteboard. Each night, I'd shake my head no, not wanting to get his hopes up about the faint sounds I'd begun to notice on the 3rd day home. The muffled thump of a door closing, the distant hum of the refrigerator, the soft patter of rain against the windows. The sounds were so faint that I wasn't sure if I was actually hearing them or imagining them. By the end of the first week, I was certain. My hearing was returning gradually, but definitely. I could hear the ticking of our wall clock, the hiss of water running in the shower, the creak of floorboards under Tom's feet. The sounds were dull and distant, like hearing underwater, but they were real. I decided not to tell Tom immediately, partly because I wanted to be sure it wasn't temporary, and partly because I wanted to surprise him when my hearing was clear enough to understand speech. I imagined the joy on his face when I responded to something he said without reading his lips or seeing it written down. Our wedding anniversary was approaching in 3 weeks. I thought it would be the perfect occasion to reveal that his voice was the first thing I wanted to truly hear again. So I continued my secret, nodding along to his written notes, pretending to read his lips when sometimes I could actually make out his words, albeit muffled and indistinct. Each day my hearing improved slightly. Sounds became clearer, more defined. I could distinguish the microwave beep from the doorbell, the sound of Tom's car pulling into the driveway from the neighbors. During the day when Tom returned to work, I indulged in my own private celebration. I would turn on music, very softly, and cry as the melodies became recognizable. I played simple scales on our piano, marveling at the sound of each note. I called my sister when Tom wasn't home, not speaking, but just listening to her voice, though I couldn't yet make out most of her words. Soon, I thought, soon, I'll hear everything clearly again. As my hearing improved, I noticed Tom had resumed his late nights out. When he came home, he would move quietly, probably assuming I couldn't hear him. I thought nothing of it initially. He had put his career on hold during my recovery, and now he was likely catching up on work. 2 weeks after my surgery, I woke suddenly in the middle of the night. The digital clock on our nightstand read 2:03 a.m. Tom wasn't in bed beside me. I could hear his voice, still muffled but unmistakably his, coming from downstairs. My first thought was happiness. I could hear him. But then confusion set in. Who was he talking to at this hour? I slipped out of bed, careful not to make any noise. Moving to the top of the stairs, I strained to listen. Tom was speaking in a hushed, intimate tone I recognized from our early days together. "I miss you too, baby," he said softly. "No, she's asleep. She still can't hear anything." My heart began pounding so loudly I feared it would drown out his words. "The surgery went well, but the doctors say it could be months before she hears anything, if at all," he continued. I know. We just need to be patient a little longer." A pause then. "I love you too, Marissa. This won't be forever, I promise." I stood frozen at the top of the stairs, one hand pressed against my mouth to hold back a sob. Marissa. I knew that name. One of his backup singers, a pretty blonde with a powerful voice, who had always been overly friendly with Tom at the few band events I'd attended. "I'll see you tomorrow," Tom whispered. "Yes, during Nicole's therapy appointment. I'll tell her it ran long." Another pause. "Yes, same place as last time. Sweet dreams, baby." I heard him end the call and move around downstairs, the sound of a glass being filled with water ice cubes clinking. I retreated silently to our bedroom and slipped back into bed, my mind racing and my heart breaking all over again. As I lay there pretending to sleep, tears streaming silently down my face, I made a decision. I wouldn't confront him, not yet. First, I needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with. How long had this been going on? What were they planning? I needed answers before I made my next move. Tom slipped back into bed at 2:37 a.m. I felt him pause, probably checking to see if I was still asleep. Satisfied with my steady breathing, he turned away from me and was soon asleep himself. I lay awake until dawn, my mind replaying his words over and over. "This won't be forever, I promise." What exactly had he meant by that? Was he planning to leave me once he was certain my health was stable? Or was there something even worse in store? As the first light of morning filtered through our curtains, I made a vow to myself. I would use this unexpected advantage, my secret returned hearing, to discover the full truth. And then, when the time was right, Tom would learn just how clearly I could hear his betrayal. The next morning, I maintained my facade. I smiled at Tom when he brought me breakfast in bed, pretending not to hear him humming in the kitchen. I watched his lips move as he told me he had a studio session that afternoon, but would be back in time to take me to my therapy appointment. "I love you," he said, kissing my forehead before he left. The words that once made my heart soar now cut like knives. As soon as his car pulled away, I began my investigation. I started with his phone, which for once he'd left charging on the nightstand, a careless mistake that worked in my favor. His password was still the same one he'd used since we got married the date we met, followed by my initials. The irony wasn't lost on me. The text messages between Tom and Marissa confirmed everything I'd heard and more. They'd been seeing each other for over a year. since shortly after my hearing loss had become accepted as likely permanent. The texts were filled with intimate details, plans for their future, and worst of all, discussions about me. "She's doing better with the signing, but it's not the same," Tom had written 3 months earlier. "I feel trapped in a silent world with her." Marissa's response, "You deserve happiness, Tom. We both do." I scrolled through months of their conversations, each message another crack in my heart. There were photos, too. Marissa in lingerie, the two of them together in places I recognized, including our favorite weekend getaway spot. The final blow came in their most recent exchange. "The doctor says she might hear again, but what are the chances really?" Tom had written the day before my surgery. "We just need to be careful for a few more months, then we can be together properly." "What about the money situation?" Marissa had replied. "Almost done moving it. She doesn't check the accounts anyway, never has." I immediately opened our banking app. Sure enough, our joint savings account, the one we'd been building for years partly for a future child's education, was significantly smaller than it should have been. Regular transfers had been going to an account I didn't recognize for the past 8 months. My hands shook as I placed his phone exactly where I'd found it. I needed more information, but I also needed to be careful. If Tom suspected I could hear, or that I knew about his betrayal, I would lose my advantage. I called my sister Amber using the video relay service we'd been using since my hearing loss. Through the interpreter, I asked her to come over, making it clear this was urgent. I couldn't risk telling her the truth over the call. I needed to speak to her in person. When Amber arrived an hour later, I took her out to the backyard patio, away from any possible hidden cameras or recording devices Tom might have set up. There, I finally broke down and told her everything. My partially restored hearing, Tom's late-night call, the text messages, and the missing money. Amber's face cycled through shock, rage, and heartbreak on my behalf. "That bastard!" she signed furiously. "I'll kill him!" "No!" I signed back. "I don't want a confrontation. Not yet. I need to understand everything first." "What do you need me to do?" she asked. "Help me find a good divorce lawyer quietly. And I need somewhere to stay when this all comes out." "You know you can stay with me as long as you need," she replied. "But Nicole, you can't keep pretending forever. It's not healthy." "Just until I have everything in order," I promised. "I need to protect myself financially before he realizes I know." Over the next week, I lived a double life. On the surface, I was the same deaf wife, dependent on written notes and lip reading to communicate with my husband. I smiled when appropriate, nodded at his explanations for late nights, and pretended not to notice when he came home smelling of unfamiliar perfume. Meanwhile, I was gathering evidence and preparing for my exit. I met with a lawyer Amber had found, a shark of a woman who specialized in divorces involving financial deception. I opened my own bank account at a different bank and began transferring small amounts of my personal money into it. I made copies of our financial records, tax returns, property deeds, and insurance policies. The lawyer advised me to install cameras in our home to document Tom's behavior. With Amber's help, I set up small, discrete cameras in our living room, kitchen, and the hallway leading to our bedroom. I made sure they were positioned to respect private areas, but would capture any visitors Tom might bring home. I didn't have to wait long. 3 days after installing the cameras, Tom texted me that my therapy session had been moved to a later time slot, and he wouldn't be able to pick me up as planned. He suggested I take an Uber, and he would meet me at the therapist's office. It was a lie, of course. My therapy session hadn't been rescheduled. As soon as Tom would have normally left to pick me up, I received an alert from the security cameras. Tom had arrived home with Marissa. I watched the live feed on my phone from a coffee shop near my therapist's office where I'd gone to maintain my alibi. The footage was like watching a horror movie starring my own husband. He led Marissa through our home, his arm around her waist, stopping to kiss her in the hallway. The same hallway lined with photos from our wedding. They disappeared into our bedroom, deliberately outside the camera range, but I didn't need to see more. 45 minutes later, they emerged, Marissa straightening her clothes and Tom looking relaxed and happy in a way I hadn't seen in years. Before they left, Tom gave her something small from his pocket. A key. My key to our home. That night, I called Amber again and asked her to come to my next appointment with the lawyer. "It's time to finalize everything," I told her through the interpreter. "I have all the evidence I need." At the lawyer's office, we reviewed the prenuptial agreement Tom and I had signed before our marriage, his idea, ironically, to protect his music royalties. The lawyer pointed out several clauses that worked in my favor given the circumstances, especially regarding infidelity and financial deception. "We have enough to file now," she said. "But given what you've told me about the missing money, I suggest we move quickly to freeze the joint accounts." "Not yet," I replied. "I have something specific in mind." I explained my plan. A dinner celebration supposedly marking 6 weeks since my surgery, where I would invite our closest friends, Tom's bandmates, including Marissa, and our families. It would be the perfect setting for the truth to come out. "Are you sure about this?" Amber asked, concern evident in her expression. "It will be very public." "He humiliated me privately for over a year," I signed firmly. "He doesn't get to hide when it all comes crashing down." The lawyer nodded approvingly. "Just make sure all the financial protections are in place before then. I'll have the papers ready for you to sign tomorrow." That evening, Tom suggested we go out to dinner to celebrate the 6-week mark since my surgery. "We should do something special," he wrote on the whiteboard. "Invite friends and family this weekend." I nodded enthusiastically, marveling at how perfectly he was playing into my hands. I wrote back, "Great idea, let's have it at Giovanni's." It was our favorite restaurant where we'd had our rehearsal dinner before the wedding. "Perfect," he replied, smiling warmly. "I'll make the reservations. Who should we invite?" I wrote down a list that included my sister, my best friend Julia, Tom's parents, his bandmates, including Marissa, she's so talented, and a few other close friends. Tom hesitated briefly at Marissa's name, but quickly covered it with a smile. "Of course," he wrote. "The whole band should be there." Over the next few days, I finalized my preparations. I signed the divorce papers but instructed the lawyer not to file them until after the dinner. I moved most of my important documents and irreplaceable possessions to Amber's house under the guise of lending her some books and family photos for a project. I withdrew my half of our remaining joint funds and secured them in my new account. The night before the dinner, Tom was especially attentive, bringing me tea, massaging my shoulders, writing sweet notes about how proud he was of my progress. I wondered if his conscience was bothering him, or if this was just another performance. As we got ready for bed, he wrote on the whiteboard, "Any changes with your hearing?" I hesitated, then wrote back, "I had a feeling today during therapy. The doctor says sometimes hearing returns suddenly. Maybe tomorrow will be the day." Tom's smile faltered for just a second. So briefly, I might have missed it if I hadn't been watching for it. "That would be amazing." He wrote, his handwriting slightly less steady than usual. I went to sleep that night with a strange sense of calm. Tomorrow would change everything, but I was ready. The truth had set me free before Tom even knew I had discovered it. Saturday evening arrived with perfect late summer weather. Tom seemed uncharacteristically nervous as we got dressed for the dinner, checking his phone frequently and disappearing into the bathroom for longer than necessary. "You look beautiful," he said when I emerged in a deep blue dress I knew he loved. I smiled and mouthed, "Thank you," watching his shoulders relax slightly at my continued pretense of deafness. We arrived at Giovanni's 30 minutes early to greet our guests. I had requested a private room, and the restaurant had arranged a long table beautifully set with flowers and candles. I positioned the place cards strategically. Tom at one end of the table, me at the other, with Marissa seated directly across from my sister Amber. Guests began arriving in small groups. My heart raced when Marissa entered with the other band members. She wore a fitted red dress and looked uncomfortable, her eyes darting between Tom and me. Tom maintained his distance, greeting her with the same casual friendliness he showed the other band members. but I caught their momentary eye contact, a silent acknowledgement of their secret. Once everyone was seated and drinks had been served, Tom stood to offer a toast. I watched him slip easily into the role of devoted husband, raising his glass to my incredible wife and her remarkable recovery journey. Our friends and family smiled and clinked glasses. Tom's parents beamed at their son's apparent devotion. Marissa stared into her wine glass, avoiding eye contact with anyone. As the appetizers were served, I took a deep breath and stood tapping my glass gently with a spoon. The room quieted, all eyes turning to me with curiosity. Tom looked confused. This wasn't part of our planned script. I cleared my throat and spoke aloud for the first time in our friend's presence since the accident. I want to thank everyone for coming tonight, I said, my voice slightly raspy from lack of use, but strong and clear. The reaction was immediate. Gasps and exclamations erupted around the table. Julia covered her mouth in shock. Tom's father stood halfway out of his chair. Tom himself froze wine glass halfway to his lips, his face draining of color. As you can all hear, I continued, my surgery was successful. My hearing has been gradually returning for the past few weeks. Applause broke out quickly, followed by congratulatory calls. Only 3 people weren't celebrating Tom, who looked like he might be sick. Marissa, whose eyes had widened in horror, and Amber, who knew what was coming next. I waited for the noise to settle before continuing. It's been an interesting experience regaining my hearing bit by bit. At first, it was just environmental sounds, the clock ticking, water running, doors closing. Then about 3 weeks ago, I began to hear voices. I looked directly at Tom now. In fact, the first clear voice I heard was Tom's at 2 a.m, whispering on the phone. The room grew uncomfortably silent. Tom's expression shifted from shock to wariness. He was speaking to someone he called baby. I said, my voice steady despite the emotion building inside me. He was assuring her that I still couldn't hear anything, that they just needed to be patient a little longer. I turned my gaze to Marissa, who had gone pale. That person was you, wasn't it, Marissa? The room erupted in murmurs and shocked glances between the dinner guests. Tom stood abruptly. Nicole, this isn't the place. Sit down, Tom, I said firmly. You've had over a year to speak your truth. Now it's my turn. Surprisingly, he obeyed, sinking back into his chair. I addressed our guests again. I didn't confront Tom immediately when I heard that call. Instead, I listened and learned. I discovered that while I was struggling to adapt to a world without sound, my husband was building a new life with someone else. From my purse, I removed printed copies of text messages and bank statements, placing them on the table. I learned that he's been transferring our joint savings to a separate account for the past 8 months, money we were saving for our future children's education. Tom's mother let out a soft cry of distress. I also discovered that he gave Marissa a key to our home and has been bringing her there when I'm supposedly at therapy. Marissa stood suddenly. I should go. Actually, I think you should stay, I said. There's something else everyone should know. I looked at Tom, giving him one last chance to be honest. Do you want to tell them, or should I? Tom's jaw clenched, but he remained silent. Marissa is pregnant, I announced, watching shock register on several faces. With Tom's child. The revelation hit like a physical blow. Tom's father cursed loudly. Julia began crying softly. The band members exchanged uncomfortable glances, suggesting they might have known or suspected. Nicole, please. Tom finally spoke, his voice breaking. We need to discuss this privately. There are things you don't understand. I understand perfectly, I interrupted. I understand that while I was at my lowest point, struggling to adapt to deafness, you found comfort in someone else's arms. I understand that you were planning to leave me once you'd secured your financial position. I understand that you were counting on my disability to hide your betrayal. I straightened my shoulders and looked around the table. What I want everyone here to understand is that I am not a victim. I am not broken. When life took my hearing, I adapted. And when my husband betrayed me, I chose not to break down, but to stand up. I turned back to Tom. The divorce papers have already been signed. The accounts have been frozen. The locks will be changed tomorrow. You can collect your things under my sister's supervision. The silence that followed was profound. Then Tom's mother stood, walked around the table, and embraced me tightly. "I am so sorry," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "So very sorry." One by one, our friends expressed their support, some with words, others with hugs or hands squeezing mine. Tom sat motionless, seemingly unable to process how completely his deception had unraveled. Marissa had slipped out during the commotion, unable to face the collective judgment of the room. Two of the band members followed shortly after, murmuring awkward apologies. When the initial shock had subsided, I asked the server to bring the meals we'd ordered. "I've lost my appetite," I announced, "but there's no reason for good food to go to waste. Please enjoy dinner. I've already paid the bill." I collected my purse and jacket. Amber stood to leave with me. "One last thing," I said, pausing at the doorway. "Tom, you once told me that losing my hearing was the worst thing that could happen to a musician. You were wrong. Losing my hearing taught me to listen in different ways, to pay attention to what people don't say, to notice patterns, to trust my instincts. In the end, it wasn't my ears that saved me. It was finally listening to my heart." With that, I walked out of the restaurant and into the warm evening air, feeling lighter than I had in years. The chapter of my life with Tom was ending, but my story was far from over. The weeks following the dinner were both challenging and liberating. I moved into Amber's spare bedroom temporarily while the divorce proceedings began. Tom made several attempts to contact me, leaving voicemails full of explanations and apologies, sending flowers that Amber promptly returned, even showing up at her house one evening until she threatened to call the police. "He keeps saying it wasn't what it looked like," Amber told me after one particularly persistent phone call. "As if there's any innocent explanation for what he did." "Let him talk to my lawyer," I replied, focusing on the sheet music in front of me. I had returned to playing piano daily, each note clearer than the last, as my hearing continued to improve. The divorce moved surprisingly quickly. Tom didn't contest anything, likely aware that fighting would only make his betrayal more public. He agreed to all my terms, including selling our house and splitting the proceeds. My lawyer discovered he had hidden more money than I initially found, but the court ordered it returned to our joint assets. I learned from mutual friends that Marissa had moved to Portland, supposedly to be closer to her family as her pregnancy progressed. Tom had apparently followed her there, taking a job at a recording studio and abandoning his band and the life he'd built in Seattle. "Good riddance," Julia said when she told me this news over coffee. "You know what amazes me most about all this? How strong you've been." I considered her words carefully. "I don't always feel strong," I admitted. "Some nights, I still cry myself to sleep, wondering if there was something I could have done differently." "Like what?" "Not lost your hearing?" Julia shook her head firmly. "Nicole, what happened to you was tragic, but how Tom responded was his choice. You didn't drive him to cheat." She was right, of course, but healing from betrayal isn't a linear process. Some days, I felt empowered by my decision to take control of the situation. Other days, the pain and humiliation would wash over me anew. During this time, I joined a support group for people with hearing loss. The group met weekly at a community center, and though my hearing had largely returned, I found comfort in connecting with others who understood the isolation I had experienced. It was there I met Marcus, a music therapist who worked with deaf and hard of hearing children. He had lost his hearing temporarily as a teenager due to a severe infection, and that experience had shaped his career path. Music isn't just what we hear, he explained during one session. It's what we feel, the vibrations, the rhythms, the emotional resonance. Even people who can't hear conventionally can experience music in profound ways. His words sparked an idea that grew into a new direction for my career. I began researching music therapy programs, specifically those focused on hearing-impaired individuals. With my background in music education and my personal experience with hearing loss, I realized I had something unique to offer. 6 months after the fateful dinner that ended my marriage, I enrolled in a specialized certification program for music therapy. My instructor was impressed by my perspective and suggested I consider opening my own practice focused on children with hearing impairments once I completed my certification. There's a real need for someone with your combination of skills and experience, she told me. As I immersed myself in this new path, the pain of Tom's betrayal began to recede. It didn't disappear entirely. I doubt it ever will. But it no longer defined me. I was building something meaningful from the ashes of what I had lost. The divorce was finalized almost exactly 1 year after I first overheard Tom's late-night phone call. To mark the occasion, Amber suggested we have a freedom celebration with close friends. I counter-proposed a different kind of commemoration. I want to do something that feels like moving forward, not just celebrating the end of something, I explained. So instead of a party, I invited my support group to help me launch a weekend music workshop for deaf and hard-of-hearing children. We converted a rented studio space into an interactive sound experience, with bass-heavy speakers embedded in the floor so participants could feel the vibrations, visual representations of sound waves projected on the walls, and instruments modified to enhance tactile feedback. 20 children attended that first workshop, ranging in age from 5 to 15. Some had been deaf from birth. Others, like me, had lost their hearing later. Watching their faces light up as they connected with music in new ways was more healing than any divorce party could have been. At the end of the weekend, several parents approached me about continuing the program. With their encouragement and some crowdfunding support, I established the Resonance Music Center 3 months later. A dedicated space for hearing-impaired individuals to experience music through multiple senses. The studio quickly became my new home. I hired Marcus and 2 other specialists, and we developed a curriculum that combined traditional music education with innovative approaches for those with hearing impairments. We welcomed students of all ages and abilities, creating a community where differences in hearing were viewed as variations in perspective rather than limitations. 1 year after opening Resonance, I stood at the back of our main studio, watching a group of children feel the vibrations of a cello through special platforms beneath their feet. Their faces shone with joy and wonder, reminding me why I had created this place. My phone buzzed with a text from Amber. "Turn on Channel 5 News when you get home. Someone you know is making headlines." Later that evening, I followed her suggestion and found myself looking at Tom's face on my television screen. He had been arrested for embezzlement from the Portland recording studio where he worked. According to the news report, he had been stealing from clients for months to support an increasingly expensive lifestyle. I felt no satisfaction at his downfall, only a profound sadness for the man I had once loved and the life we might have had. I thought about calling Marissa to see if she and the baby needed any support, but decided against it. Some chapters need to remain closed. Instead, I opened my laptop and worked on the grant proposal I had been drafting to expand Resonance's programs to more communities. The past no longer had power over me. My focus remained firmly on the future I was building, one filled with music purpose and authentic connections. The journey from that night when I first heard Tom whisper "baby" to another woman had been painful beyond words. I had lost my husband, my home, and my sense of security. But in that loss, I had found a stronger version of myself and a deeper purpose for my gifts. Sometimes I think about how differently things might have turned out if my hearing hadn't returned when it did, or if I had confronted Tom immediately instead of listening and planning. But those alternative paths exist only in imagination. The reality is this: when life shattered my world into silence, I learned to listen in new ways. And when betrayal threatened to break me, I chose instead to become whole on my own terms. If there's one thing my journey has taught me, it's that our greatest strength often emerges from our most vulnerable moments. We cannot control what happens to us, but we always have a choice in how we respond. And sometimes, the most powerful response is simply to wait, listen, and choose our moment to rise. Have you ever had to completely reinvent yourself after a major life change? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below.